What if our known American history is built upon the ruins of previous civilizations? What if our history goes back way further, is way deeper, and much more interesting than we have been told? A lot of you know I've been very carefully mapping out biblical lands in America and showing that it is highly probable that the Bible took place on the North American continent. We have mapped out much of Arizona to have been part of the original Egypt, more specifically, the land of Mitzrayim. I've come across quite a few interesting articles lately about the extensive canal system that used to run across Arizona. Not to mention all the other extensive, advanced, highly impressive ruins that are buried under the ground of Arizona. Huge cities, massive populations, hewn stone buildings 7 stories high. But this video is going to be more about the canals. As you know, Egypt is known for the Nile River System. We have already identified the Colorado River as being the true Nile. However, there's much more to the story than that, as the entire region was irrigated through advanced canal systems using water from rivers like the Colorado, the Gila, G-I-L-A, and the San Juan, to mention a few. This is a very long article. I'll put the link in the description of this video if you would like to go read the whole thing by yourself, but I'm just going to point out a few snippets of this article for you. It reads, in the Gila and Salt River valleys of southern Arizona are relics of mysterious interest which baffle investigation, and they're being hacked to pieces and carried away piecemeal because Americans know little about them and the government does not care. They have been more rapidly effaced during the last dozen years than in the previous century. The ranchman and the farmer are clearing the land of prehistoric walls and excavations to sow wheat and alfalfa crops. Modern irrigation systems are demolishing aboriginal masterpieces of masonry, and curio hunters are hacking to pieces mural works and digging into ancient tombs. This is on a broad slope plain beginning at the confluence of the Gila and Salt Rivers. 42 miles from Phoenix are the greatest ruins of the prehistoric towns. Some men of science say these towns were built in the Stone Age. Others say they existed 7,000 years ago. My research has shown this area was highly populated during the times of Moses. So yeah, I would say they're pretty old. Says populations of 40,000, 50,000, towns of 20,000 population. Okay, so here's some about the canals. Irrigation canals, the oldest known in the civilized world, are found throughout the region. These waterways were built with exactness and skills. The largest has been sadly torn to pieces in the past few years by the ranchmen, but it still shows the wonders of its construction. It has an average width of 7 feet. It is 60 miles long and terminates in a reservoir a mile long by a half-mile wide. Think of the enormous labor of constructing such a canal and reservoir with stone implements and of carrying the excavated earth away in wicker baskets. I personally highly doubt that's how they were constructed, but we'll go with that. That is only one of 17 distinct prehistoric irrigation systems in the Gila Valley. The size of these canals gives some idea of the scale on which these people conducted their agricultural operations. They constructed an artificial river to supply the water which their crops required. They grew great quantities of corn, and they also raised beans, as well as 2 or 3 varieties of squash. Says you can walk for miles in this region, find every foot of the sandy surface more or less mixed with pieces of broken pottery. The paint's still on them. This is interesting. In the neighborhood of Tempe, an overflow from the Gila at some distant period washed away the ruins until they crumbled and were spread out level with the country. Back 10 miles from the Gila River, the ground is higher and was once the site of a city. Portions of the buried city wall by which it was protected are still standing, more than 20 feet in thickness. Okay, and it goes on to talk about more about the houses and the structure. We're going to skip ahead to more about the canals here. This is much of the country is very little higher than the present-day riverbed of the Nile River, and at one time a branch of that stream must have flowed into a basin which formed a natural reservoir. There was a rise of about 10 feet at one point between the basin and the river, and the sandstone formation shows unmistakable signs of having been cut by artificial means, perhaps with the idea of assisting the entrance of the water by enlarging the passage. 5 canals lead out of the basin, all on the south and west, which confirm the belief that it was once a reservoir to store water against the periods of drought. Okay, again, skipping ahead. I hate to skip any of this because it's all interesting, but again, focusing on the canals, I'll put the link in the bio. Says, exploration shows that the great artificial canals, which were its arteries of commerce and agriculture, were elaborately terraced. Millions of cobblestones were used to retain the canal banks. An army of thousands of men and women must have spent months, perhaps years, in carrying loads of stones and wicker baskets. Again, I doubt that's how they did this. On their backs from the distant places to the banks. The largest canal leading to Las Aquas, sorry, it's getting blurry, it's hard to see, consisted of a central ditch 5 feet in width. 5 feet in width at the bottom and broadening above to 30 feet. It was 24 miles long. It terminated in a closed reservoir a mile in length by half a mile wide. The construction of such a work nowadays would be no mean engineering enterprise. But the vastness of the undertaking by a little city where only stone implements, I doubt that, for digging and wicker baskets for transportation were known is extraordinary. So what I'm finding though, guys, is that this is a tangent, but there was a civilization, probably more like the Native American civilizations we are familiar with, that was living on top of ruins from previous civilizations. And when you go deeper down and further back in time, those civilizations were much more advanced than, for example, the Native American civilizations that we are familiar with. So I'm guessing they were not building these with wicker baskets. I just don't think so. Okay, now it's talking about how they protected the canals against seepage. It says to render the clay beds of the canals impervious, they were first muddled and then, by means of burning brush and wood, was burned to a terracotta consistency. The bottom expedition proved the fact that the prehistoric people used their canals for navigation. The enormous cedar timbers that are yet found in these wonderful towns. So all of these towns were built of cedar. Okay, stone and cedar, like cedar rafters, which is interesting because there's not really cedar growing there today. But again, that's another topic. There were massive petrified cedar forests, or at least forests, I believe they were cedar, in the area that were standing trees turned to stone that were harvested by mining companies. So there were a lot more trees there at some point. There was no way to get them to the places of their use but by floating them down the rivers and through the canals. The course of the smaller canals may now be traced centuries after they have been filled with sand and vegetation by means of small black pebbles placed along the banks by the inhabitants, and the belief held by the Zunis that they assist the motion of the currents. Okay. So then they're saying that they think all these towns kind of were along the edge of these canals, and that a lot of them had a special reservoir, and in all cases had one or more pits or ovens for cooking. They're going on to wonder how these towns got buried. They apparently got buried, possibly by an earthquake. Here's some more running out time, skipping ahead. Now they're talking about the mummies they found. Okay, so I skipped several pages, but the rest of it's talking more about the structure and the other archaeological finds. So this is one article about the canals. I have more. I'm going to do a couple more videos on other articles, but this one was really long, so it took up a whole video by itself. But this is all in Arizona, which is Egypt. So let me know what you think.